The emergency beacon pierced through the cosmic void like a dying star's final scream. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the holographic display aboard the UES Defiance, her weathered hands clasped behind her back as the alien transmission played for the third time. The voice that emerged from the speakers was melodic yet desperate, speaking in the universal trade language that had become standard across the known galaxy. This is Diplomatic Vessel Serenity of the Cathara Collective, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. Our defensive systems have failed. We have civilian evacuees aboard, including younglings. Please, anyone who receives this message, we need immediate assistance. Our coordinates are... The bridge fell silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. Commander Torres, Chen's second-in-command, stepped forward with a grim expression. "Ma'am, that transmission is coming from the neutral zone, approximately 6 days' journey from our current position." Chen nodded slowly, her mind already calculating the implications. The Cathara were one of the newer species to join the Galactic Council, a peaceful people known for their incredible artistic achievements and diplomatic skills. They had no natural enemies, which made this attack all the more troubling. "What do we know about the attackers?" Chen asked, turning to her intelligence officer. Lieutenant Commander Park consulted her data tablet. "The transmission cuts out before they can identify their assailants, but long-range sensors picked up energy signatures consistent with Vorth technology. The problem is, the Vorth hegemony was supposedly wiped out 3 centuries ago." A chill ran down Chen's spine. The Vorth had been one of the galaxy's most feared civilizations, known for their brutal efficiency and complete disregard for non-Vorth life. Their extinction had been celebrated across dozens of worlds, marking the end of an era of terror that had lasted for millennia. "Could it be remnants? Survivors who've been hiding?" Torres suggested. "Possibly," Park replied. "Or someone could be using their technology. Either way, if they're targeting civilian vessels, this could be the beginning of something much larger." Chen walked to the viewport, gazing out at the star field beyond. In the distance, she could see the running lights of the other ships in their small fleet. The Defiance was the flagship of the Terra Defense Initiative's Rapid Response Force, comprising 12 vessels of various classes. They had been returning from a routine patrol when the distress call arrived. "Ma'am," came the voice of Communications Officer Williams from her station. "We're receiving similar distress calls from 4 other locations. All Cathara vessels, all reporting attacks by unknown forces." The Admiral's jaw tightened. This wasn't a random pirate attack or a territorial dispute. Someone was systematically hunting the Cathara, and the peaceful species had no military force capable of defending themselves. "Plot a course to the nearest distress signal," Chen ordered. "Maximum burn. And send a message to Terra Command informing them of the situation." "Admiral," Park interjected hesitantly, "with respect, we're significantly outnumbered if these really are Vorth forces. Our fleet is designed for patrol duties and anti-piracy operations, not major military engagements." Chen turned back to face her crew, and they could see the determination burning in her eyes. It was a look they had come to know well during their years of service together, the look of someone who had made an unshakable decision. "The Cathara helped us when we were struggling to establish our place in the galactic community," she said firmly. "They were among the first to welcome humanity with open arms, to treat us as equals, rather than curiosities from a death world. They taught us their art forms, shared their philosophy, and never once looked down on us for being what others called violent primitives." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Now they're crying out for help, and by God we're going to answer that call. I don't care if it's the entire Vorth fleet waiting for us. We didn't survive the wars on Earth, the colonial rebellions, and 2 centuries of space piracy to back down when friends need us." The bridge crew exchanged glances, and Chen could see the mixture of apprehension and resolve on their faces. They knew the risks, but they also knew their admiral. Sarah Chen had never abandoned anyone under her protection, and she wasn't about to start now. "Helm, increase our speed to emergency maximum," she continued. "I want engineering to squeeze every bit of power they can from our engines. Communications, send a message to the other captains in our fleet. Tell them what we're facing and give them the option to withdraw if they feel their ships and crews aren't up for the fight." Williams worked at her console for a moment, before looking up with a slight smile. "All ships responding, Admiral. Captain Morrison of the Retribution says, and I quote, 'We didn't join the Terra Defense Initiative to run from a fight.' Similar sentiments from all the other vessels." Chen felt a surge of pride. These were good people, brave people who understood what it meant to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. It was a very human trait, one that had served their species well throughout their turbulent history. As the fleet adjusted course and accelerated toward the unknown danger, Chen couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. For decades, humanity had been viewed by many galactic species as dangerous warmongers from a deadly world. Earth, with its extreme weather patterns, predatory wildlife, and history of constant warfare, was classified as a Class 7th death world, barely habitable by galactic standards. Most species came from peaceful garden worlds, where evolution had favored cooperation over competition, intelligence over aggression. They found it difficult to understand how humans had not only survived on such a hostile planet, but had thrived and eventually reached the stars. What they often failed to realize was that Earth's harsh conditions had forged humanity into something unique in the galaxy, a species capable of incredible violence when threatened, but also capable of incredible compassion and self-sacrifice when others were in need. The same instincts that made humans feared as warriors also made them unstoppable when protecting those they cared about. "Admiral," came the voice of Chief Engineer Rodriguez over the comm system. "You wanted maximum burn? You've got it. But I can't guarantee how long the engines will hold together at this output." "How long until we reach the distress signal?" Chen asked. Torres consulted the navigation display. "At our current speed, approximately 18 hours. "The engines just need to hold together for 18 hours, Chief," Chen replied into the comm. "After that, we'll either be helping evacuate civilians or we'll be too busy fighting to worry about engine efficiency." Rodriguez's laugh crackled through the speakers. "Understood, ma'am. We'll keep her running." As the hours passed, more details about the attacks began to emerge. The intelligence department worked around the clock, analyzing intercepted transmissions and scanning for any additional information about their mysterious attackers. What they discovered was troubling. The attacks were coordinated and precise, targeting Cathera vessels throughout the outer territories. The attackers seemed to know exactly where to find their targets, suggesting either inside information or extensive reconnaissance. Most concerning of all, there had been no survivors from any of the attacked vessels. "It's genocide," Park reported grimly during one of their briefings. "They're not taking prisoners or demanding ransoms. They're systematically exterminating every Cathara they encounter." The weight of that realization settled over the bridge crew like a heavy blanket. They weren't just responding to a distress call anymore. They were potentially the only thing standing between an entire species and extinction. Chen stood at her command station, watching the tactical display update with new information as they drew closer to their destination. The Cathara Collective had been one of the galaxy's greatest success stories, a species that had transcended their primitive origins through art, philosophy, and peaceful cooperation. They had created some of the most beautiful works in known space and had served as mediators in dozens of conflicts. Now someone wanted them dead, and humanity was riding to their rescue. 12 hours until we reach the distress signal," Torres announced. Chen nodded, her mind already shifting to tactical considerations. They would need to be smart about this. Courage alone wouldn't be enough if they were facing superior numbers and technology. "I want all department heads in the briefing room in 1 hour," she ordered. "We're going to go over everything we know about Vorth tactics and see if we can find weaknesses we can exploit." As her senior staff dispersed to gather their information, Chen remained on the bridge, staring out at the stars. Somewhere ahead of them, innocent people were dying while others fled in terror. It was a situation that called out to every protective instinct humanity possessed. The galaxy might see humans as dangerous predators from a death world, but they were about to learn something else about the species from Earth. When the innocent cried out for help, humanity answered, regardless of the cost. The UES Defiance and her sister ships continued their relentless journey through the void, carrying hope to those who had none and bringing the wrath of Earth to those who preyed on the defenseless. In 18 hours, they would discover whether human determination and ingenuity could overcome whatever nightmare awaited them in the darkness between the stars. But one thing was certain. They would not turn away, no matter what they found. The first thing Admiral Chen noticed as they dropped out of hyperspace was the debris field. Twisted metal fragments that had once been a graceful Cathara vessel drifted like cosmic tombstones against the backdrop of a distant red giant star. The wreckage told a story of overwhelming violence, of a ship that had been torn apart rather than simply destroyed. "Sensors picking up 17 vessels at the edge of the system," Lieutenant Commander Park reported, her voice tight with controlled tension. "Configuration matches archival data on Vorth destroyer-class ships." Chen felt her stomach clench. 17 ships against their 12, and their intelligence suggested these weren't just any vessels, they were warships designed by a civilization that had conquered half the galaxy before their downfall. "Are there any Cathara survivors?" she asked. Sensor technician Patel worked frantically at his console. "Negative, Admiral. But I'm detecting life signs from an escape pod approximately 2 million kilometers from our position. It's heavily damaged and venting atmosphere." "Helm, intercept course, maximum burn," Chen ordered. "Communications, try to raise that pod." The tactical display showed the enemy vessels slowly turning toward their position. The Vorth ships were massive, angular things that looked more like weapons than spacecraft. Their dark hulls absorbed light rather than reflecting it, giving them an ominous presence that made the human vessels seem tiny by comparison. "No response from the escape pod, Admiral," Williams reported. "Their communication system appears to be completely offline." Commander Torres studied the tactical situation with growing concern. "Ma'am, those enemy ships will be within weapons range in approximately 12 minutes. If we're going to retrieve those survivors, we need to move fast." Chen's mind raced through the possibilities. They could run, try to save the survivors, and hope to escape before the enemy fleet caught them. Or they could stay and fight, knowing they were likely doomed but possibly buying time for other rescue efforts. It wasn't really a choice at all. "Signal the fleet," she said firmly. "Battle formation Delta 7. The Retribution and Vigilance are to provide cover while the Defiance retrieves the survivors. All other vessels prepare for engagement." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, their training taking over despite the magnitude of what they faced. Chen had handpicked most of these people during her years of service, and she trusted each of them with her life. "Engineering reports all systems green," Torres announced. "Weapons charging, shields at maximum." The UES Defiance swept toward the damaged escape pod like a hawk diving for prey. Behind them, the rest of the human fleet spread into attack formation, their smaller vessels darting between each other with an agility that no other species could match. "Pod retrieved," came the report from the hangar deck. "Medical team is responding to the bay." Chen barely had time to acknowledge the report before the first enemy volley arrived. Brilliant streams of energy lanced across space, forcing the human ships to scatter and weave through the barrage. The Vorth had opened fire at extreme range, clearly confident in their superiority. "Return fire," Chen ordered. "Target their lead ship." The human vessels unleashed their own weapons, and the difference in their tactical approach became immediately apparent. While the Vorth fired massive, slow-moving energy beams designed to obliterate large targets, the humans used rapid-fire plasma cannons and missile salvos that could adapt and maneuver mid-flight. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the comm from the Retribution. "These things are tough, Admiral. Our shots are barely scratching their armor." Chen watched as her fleet's weapons struck the enemy vessels, seeing the truth in Morrison's words. The Vorth ships absorbed the attacks with minimal damage, their heavy armor shrugging off impacts that would have crippled most other vessels. But the humans had advantages too. Their ships were faster, more maneuverable, and their crews had grown up on a world where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. While the Vorth vessels moved in predictable formation patterns, the human ships flowed around their attacks like schools of fish avoiding a predator. "Admiral," Park called out urgently, "the survivor from the escape pod is conscious. She's requesting to speak with you immediately." "Put her through," Chen replied, not taking her eyes off the tactical display. The voice that came through the speakers was weak but determined, speaking in accented galactic standard. "Human Commander, my name is Lirath of the Cathara Diplomatic Corps. You must listen carefully. These are not the original Vorth." Chen's attention snapped to the communication. "Explain." "The attackers call themselves the Neo-Vorth Ascendancy," Lirath continued, her words punctuated by the sound of the ship's weapons firing. "They are descendants of a Vorth colony fleet that escaped the Purge 3 centuries ago. They have been building their strength in the dark space between galaxies, and they have come back for revenge." "Revenge against whom?" Chen asked. "Everyone," came the chilling reply. "They blame all galactic species for the destruction of their empire. The Cathara are only the beginning. They plan to cleanse the galaxy of what they call inferior life forms and rebuild their civilization on the ashes of ours." The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. This wasn't just an attack on the Cathara. It was the opening move in a war of extermination that would encompass the entire galaxy. "How many ships do they have?" she demanded. "Thousands," Lirath whispered. "This is only a scouting force." Before Chen could respond, the battle situation changed dramatically. The Vorth vessels suddenly split into 3 groups, attempting to surround the human fleet and eliminate their mobility advantage. It was a classic tactical maneuver, one that should have been devastating against a smaller force. But Admiral Chen had spent her entire career studying military history, including the records of ancient Earth conflicts where outnumbered forces had achieved impossible victories through courage and innovation. "All ships, execute pattern Gamma," she commanded. "We're going to show these bastards what humans learned from the Battle of Thermopylae." The human vessels suddenly contracted into a tight formation, presenting what appeared to be an easy target. The Vorth took the bait, concentrating their fire on what they assumed was a cornered enemy. But as their energy beams converged on the human position, the Earth ships exploded outward in all directions, passing through gaps in the Vorth formation at maximum speed. "Now!" Chen shouted. "Target their engines!" The human fleet struck like a swarm of angry hornets, their weapons focusing on the more vulnerable engine sections of the Vorth ships. Years of anti-piracy operations had taught them that disabling an enemy was often more effective than trying to destroy them outright. The first Vorth vessel began to list as its main drive went offline. Then a second ship found itself spinning helplessly as cascade failures spread through its propulsion systems. The enemy formation, so imposing moments before, began to fall apart as more ships lost maneuvering capability. "That's not possible," came a transmission from one of the Vorth ships, speaking in heavily accented galactic standard. "Your weapons are primitive. Your ships are inferior." Commander Torres couldn't help but smile as he responded. "Maybe so. But we learned to fight on a world where everything wanted to kill us. Your ancestors never had that advantage. The battle continued for another hour, with the human ships using hit-and-run tactics to gradually wear down their larger opponents. They took damage. The UES Perseverance lost her port weapons array, and the UES Stalwart suffered a hull breach that forced the evacuation of 2 decks. But their casualties were remarkably light, considering the odds. Finally, the remaining Vorth vessels began to withdraw, their formation broken and several of their ships either destroyed or too damaged to continue fighting. "Should we pursue?" Torres asked. Chen shook her head. "Let them go. We've sent our message." As the enemy fleet disappeared into hyperspace, the human vessels regrouped to assess the damage and tend to their wounded. The battle had been won, but Chen knew it was only the beginning. "Admiral," Lirath's voice came through the speakers again, "I must contact my people immediately. They need to know what's coming." "Of course," Chen replied. "But first, tell me everything you know about these Neo-Vorth. Their numbers, their technology, their base of operations. If they're planning a war of extermination, the galaxy needs to be prepared." Over the next several hours, as repair crews worked to fix the battle damage, Lirath provided a grim picture of what they faced. The Neo-Vorth had spent 3 centuries nursing their hatred and building their strength. They had advanced their technology beyond what their ancestors possessed, and they had numbers that dwarfed any single fleet in the galaxy. But they had also revealed something crucial in this first encounter. They could be beaten. Human tactics and determination had overcome superior numbers and technology, just as they had countless times throughout Earth's bloody history. "What will you do now?" Lirath asked as her own people's rescue ships finally arrived to collect her. Chen looked out at her battered but victorious fleet, then at the debris field that marked where innocent beings had died simply for being different from their attackers. "We're going to do what humans have always done," she said quietly. "We're going to stand up to bullies, protect those who can't protect themselves, and show these Neo-Vorth that the galaxy isn't going to roll over for them." As the Keth-Ara rescue ships departed and the human fleet began its journey back to friendly space, Chen knew that everything had changed. The galaxy was about to face its greatest threat in centuries, and somehow, the species that everyone considered violent primitives from a death world had become its first line of defense. The irony wasn't lost on her. For all their sophisticated civilizations and advanced technologies, the peaceful species of the galaxy had never learned the harsh lessons that Earth had taught humanity. They didn't understand that sometimes survival required the willingness to fight, to sacrifice, and to stand against impossible odds for what was right. But they were about to learn, and humanity would be their teacher. The UES Defiance and her sister ships set course for home, carrying with them the knowledge that would soon shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The Neo-Vorth Ascendancy thought they could terrorize the galaxy into submission, but they had made a critical error. The Galactic Council Chamber had never seen such chaos. Representatives from hundreds of worlds filled the ancient hall, their voices rising in panic as reports of Neo-Vorth attacks continued to pour in from across the galaxy. In just 3 weeks since Admiral Chen's first encounter with the enemy, 17 more worlds had fallen silent, their populations either fled or exterminated. Admiral Chen stood at the center of the maelstrom, her uniform crisp, despite having traveled for days to reach the Council's headquarters on Zentauros Prime. Around her, the galaxy's most powerful beings argued and debated while their people died, paralyzed by the scope of the threat they faced. "Order! Order!" the Council speaker, a towering crystalline being called Veltar, struck the ceremonial chime repeatedly. "We must have order if we are to address this crisis." Slowly, the cacophony subsided, leaving only the soft hum of the translation systems. Chen could feel hundreds of eyes upon her, some grateful, some suspicious, many simply desperate. "Admiral Chen of the Terra Defense Initiative," Veltar announced formally. You have requested an emergency session to address the Neo-Vorth threat. The Council recognizes your authority to speak. Chen stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Honored representatives, I come before you not as a conqueror or a politician, but as someone who has faced these enemies in battle and lived to tell about it. The Neo-Vorth ascendancy is not interested in negotiation, territory, or resources. They want nothing less than the complete extermination of every species that is not them. A ripple of uneasy murmurs passed through the assembly. Representative Morthak of the Helian Union, a species known for their diplomatic skills, raised a tentacled appendage. Admiral, surely there must be some way to reach an accommodation. No civilization can truly want total war. With respect, Representative, that's the thinking of someone whose world has never faced existential threat, Chen replied firmly. Earth's history is filled with examples of groups that sought the complete destruction of their enemies. The Neo-Vorth are following that same path, and they have the technology and numbers to achieve their goals unless we stop them. From the Kethara delegation, Ambassador Lirath stood to speak. She had recovered from her ordeal, but bore visible scars from the attack on her ship. The Admiral speaks truth. I have seen their methods firsthand. They do not take prisoners. They do not spare civilians. They do not negotiate. They simply kill, methodically and completely. The chamber fell silent as the weight of her words settled over the assembly. Finally, Counselor Tethra of the Andromedan Collective spoke up. Even if what you say is accurate, Admiral, what can be done? Our combined fleets number in the thousands of vessels, but intelligence suggests the Neo-Vorth have tens of thousands. How can we possibly stand against such numbers? Chen had been waiting for this question. She activated a holographic display that showed tactical data from her encounter with the enemy. Because, Counselor, they're fighting the wrong war. They're prepared for the galaxy they remember from 3 centuries ago, one where battles were won by whoever had the biggest ships and the most firepower. They're not prepared for the galaxy that exists today. The display shifted to show the fleet compositions of various council species. Look at your navies. For 300 years of peace, you've built exploration vessels, research ships, and ceremonial flagships. You've forgotten how to fight because you've never needed to. But humanity never forgot. Representative Salin of the Rigel Confederacy, her blue-scaled face twisted with skepticism, interjected. Are you suggesting that humans should lead our defense? Your entire fleet consists of fewer than 300 vessels. I'm suggesting, Chen replied calmly, that humans should teach you how to fight. Our ships may be few, but every one of them was designed by a species that survived on a world where evolution favored the aggressive and the adaptable. We've spent centuries refining the art of warfare because on Earth, peace was a luxury we could rarely afford. She gestured to the tactical display again. The Neo-Vorth expect to face static defense fleets protecting fixed positions. They expect slow, predictable formations and conventional tactics. What they're not expecting is for the entire galaxy to fight like a cornered predator. Over the following hours, Chen laid out her plan. It was audacious, risky, and would require unprecedented cooperation between species that had little military tradition, but it was also the only realistic chance they had of survival. The plan called for the transformation of the galaxy's civilian fleets into a mobile defense network. Cargo ships would be retrofitted with weapons and armor. Exploration vessels would become fast attack craft. Even luxury liners would be converted into troop transports and mobile command centers. You're asking us to turn our entire civilization into a military machine, observed Chancellor Vexum of the Tau Ceti Republic. I'm asking you to survive, Chen replied bluntly. The Neo-Vorth won't hesitate to target civilians, so there's no such thing as a non-combatant in this war. Everyone fights or everyone dies. The debate continued for days, but gradually the council began to accept the reality of their situation. Species after species committed their fleets to the defense effort. placing them under human tactical command in a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The transformation that followed was unprecedented in galactic history. Shipyards that had built peaceful craft for centuries retooled to produce weapons of war. Academies that had taught exploration and diplomacy now offered crash courses in military tactics. The galaxy's greatest artists and philosophers put down their tools and picked up weapons, understanding that there would be no culture left to preserve if they failed. At the center of it all was humanity, serving as the spine around which the galaxy's defense was organized. Human officers took command of mixed fleets, teaching alien crews the harsh lessons of Earth's military traditions. They showed the gentle Kethara how to coordinate devastating ambush attacks. They taught the scholarly Helix species how to use their analytical minds to predict enemy movements. They turned the peaceful garden worlds into armed camps, bristling with defensive systems. The Neovorth, meanwhile, continued their advance, apparently unaware of the massive mobilization taking place behind galactic lines. Their forces moved methodically from system to system, overwhelming any resistance they encountered and leaving only death in their wake. But as their fleet approached the galaxy's core worlds, they found something waiting for them that they hadn't expected, an enemy that refused to fight by their rules. The Battle of the Kepler Nebula became the turning point of the war. Admiral Chen commanded a fleet of over 8,000 vessels, representing every major species in the galaxy. When the Neovorth armada of 20,000 ships emerged from hyperspace, expecting to find a conventional fleet formation, they instead encountered what human military historians would later call the greatest example of asymmetric warfare in recorded history. The Allied fleet scattered into thousands of small units, each operating independently, but following an overall strategy that only the humans fully understood. Neovorth ships found themselves surrounded by swarms of smaller vessels that struck and vanished before they could respond. Their massive weapons, designed to obliterate capital ships in single shots, proved useless against enemies that refused to present large targets. For 6 days, the battle raged throughout the nebula. The Neovorth lost ship after ship to tactics they couldn't comprehend or counter. Their rigid command structure, so effective against traditional enemies, collapsed under the chaos of fighting an opponent that seemed to be everywhere at once. On the 7th day, the Neovorth fleet attempted to withdraw, but found their retreat cut off by forces they hadn't even known were present. Chen had positioned reserves throughout the surrounding systems, and now they closed like a net around the demoralized enemy. The final transmission from the Neovorth commander was broadcast across the galaxy. "This is impossible. You are inferior beings. How can you defeat us?" Chen's response became legendary. "Because, while you spent 3 centuries nursing your hatred, we spent 3 centuries learning that the strongest predator isn't the biggest or the meanest. It's the one that works best with others." The destruction of the Neovorth armada marked the end of their threat to the galaxy. Scattered remnants fled back to whatever dark corners they had emerged from, but their power was broken. The unified galactic fleet hunted down the survivors over the following months, ensuring that the threat would never rise again. In the aftermath, the galaxy found itself fundamentally changed. The military alliance forged in desperation evolved into something more, a true galactic federation united not by treaties or politics, but by the shared experience of having faced extinction together. Humanity's role in the new order was unique. They were no longer seen as dangerous primitives from a death world, but as the species that had saved everyone else when salvation seemed impossible. Human military academies opened on dozens of worlds, teaching the arts of war to species that prayed they would never need such knowledge again. Admiral Chen, now promoted to Fleet Admiral and given command of the new Galactic Defense Force, stood on the bridge of the UES Unity, flagship of a fleet that represented every free world in the galaxy. Through the viewport, she could see ships bearing the colors of hundreds of civilizations, all working together to keep the peace they had fought so hard to preserve. "Admiral," came the voice of her new aide, a young Kethara officer named Jorakal, who had requested assignment to a human ship after the war. "We are receiving reports of pirates attacking merchant vessels in the Outer Rim. Should we dispatch a patrol?" Chen smiled, remembering the words that had started this whole adventure months ago. "Yes, Lieutenant. When people cry out for help, we answer. That's what we do." As the great fleet began to move, its ships carrying the hopes and dreams of 1,000 worlds, Chen reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger for it. They had learned that survival sometimes required the willingness to fight, that peace was something that had to be defended, and that the greatest strength came not from size or technology, but from the courage to stand together when everything seemed lost. The species that had once been dismissed as violent Deathworlders had become the galaxy's protectors, teaching the universe's peaceful children that sometimes the greatest act of love was the willingness to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And in the depths of space, wherever the innocent and helpless called out for aid, the Deathworlder fleet stood ready to answer, just as they always had and always would. They had threatened the friends of humanity, and that was something the Deathworlders would never tolerate.